Hello there, Hidden Hermit. Now, I'd like everybody to stay calm. There's no need to panic. Let's all be nice and calm and relaxed. For today, we're talking about the Ten of Swords. Now, to facilitate the calmness and the groundedness is another made-up word. I've got some calming influence here. I don't know if you can hear the calming, gentle music. I've got some rose quartz sitting on some purple howlite. Got some citrine and a quartz cluster and some shungite and a black moonstone to ground us. And to facilitate that even more, I'm just going to move these down here and introduce a little bunny. There we go. There we go. There's no need to panic. Everything's fine. Everything is fine. The bunny is here to look after us. So the Ten of Swords. Look at it. It's a harsh card. It hurts to look at it. It really does. So let's get into this. And before we go into the various decks, as usual, I will remind you that the suit of swords is the alchemical element of air. Here is the Ace of Swords, being all swordy and airy. Swords relate to states of mind, mental activity, communication, ideas, philosophy, psychology, all the things to do with your head. Excuse me. Astrologically, the Ten of Swords is related to Gemini. Here is Gemini. Gemini is represented by the Lovers. The planetary ruler of Gemini is Mercury. Mercury is, of course, the Magician in the tarot. Put this down here. I'm going to move you just out of the way just for a second. The Ten of Swords rules the third decan of Gemini, which is 21 degrees to 30 degrees Gemini, which is roughly the 11th of June to the 20th of June, depending on what year we are in. And the third decan is ruled by the Sun in Gemini. And I'm showing you this card because this is a crazy card. I'm not sure if I'm completely down with this depiction of the Sun. It kind of looks evil to me. I mean, yeah, sure, there's a sun there, but I wanted to show you that anyway. Here's an image that may be a little more familiar to you. The court card ruler of the third decan of Gemini, as instructed by the Ace of Swords, is the Queen of Cups. Now, the Queen of Cups is indeed very watery. It's water of water, and that's because we're moving out of spring and moving into summer, and the first sign of summer is Cancer, which is a cardinal water sign, and the Queen of Cups is water of water. Now, in this case, I always suggest that we should reverse the Queen of Cups here, because how do we get to the Ten of Swords out of these cards? Now, it's a bit of a stretch, to be perfectly honest with you. We could probably discuss it in great detail, but you've got the Lovers and yet that dual nature. You've got that meeting of minds. You've got the Magician, and that trickster element comes through in all the Gemini cards. The sun's actually slightly displaced. He isn't in detriment or fall, but he's 2 signs away from his home in Leo, so he's probably got one eye on being back in there. I mean, if you can imagine walking into the house 2 doors down from you, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I'd rather be at home. And yes, the reverse Queen of Cups, we're getting that emotional element, and somehow this mishmash, we get the Ten of Swords. So the Ten of Swords. Some of the keywords, and again, the Ten of Swords, generally, the interpretation of the card, hey bunny, the interpretation of the card is generally accepted across most decks. There are a couple of curveballs, but they're not huge curveballs. The Hermetic decks do have a very particular way to look at the card, but we'll get back to that in just a second. So the Ten of Swords. You see a man lying on the ground, skewered with 10 swords. Now, this is A, gonna hurt, and B, possibly even be mortal. Let's be honest. Now, you can see dark clouds on the horizon, but you can also see that the element of air, that yellow, is symbolized by the sky in the background there, possibly suggesting that the sun is either behind those black clouds. It could be going down, it could be coming up, but the sun is there. It's definitely there. So let's start going through the cards. Well, no, before I do, the keywords associated with the Ten of Swords. include things such as pain, affliction, tears, suffering, grief, sadness, desolation, conclusions, exhaustion, giving up, betrayal, cutting your losses because you can't stand much more, lamentations, hitting rock bottom, things can't get any worse. Swords are really literal, and yep, this is the element of air, so we are dealing with things in the mind. Gossip is also another thing that comes up quite a lot. Now, interestingly, there is a general consensus with a lot of the decks that if you reverse the Ten of Swords, then you get a feeling of advantage, profit, success and favour, although none of these things are permanent. They're sort of fleeting. Power and authority also comes into it. There are other keywords associated with other decks, but we'll see that once we start going through it. Interestingly, Arthur Waite, in his book The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, which is basically, it's mostly the little white book you get with most Waite-Smith decks, but it does say that the interpretation is whatsoever is whatsoever is intimated by the design, suggesting that this is what it means, which is a bit painful. However, it does go on to say that it is not especially a card of violent death, which is a little bit of comfort. There is a little bit of conflict with that idea. We'll get to that in much later. So moving through the cards, I always start with the After Tarot, and here is the After Tarot. Now, the guy in the Ten of Swords, he's dead. there's no other way for it, and he's got a couple of his comrades. They're laying him to rest. He's come to his final resting place, and again you've got those black clouds in the background, and the sun is definitely there. That's very much reiterated in the very, very good book that comes with the After Tarot, written by Corinne Kenner. It's excellent. I highly advise you, if you're going to get the After Tarot, get the deck with the book, because the book's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So let's look through some of the decks that ape the Waite-Smith image. Here's the Dreaming Way, and instead of, the only difference really is instead of on his back, this guy is face up. He is still skewered with the 10 swords though. If we look at the Mystic Dreamer, now this is interesting. There is a slight difference. For a start, there's a lady, and she isn't prone. She hasn't been completely decked by these swords. She's almost attempting to she's refusing to go down to a certain extent. But there is a sense in the book that comes with it by Barbara Moore of finally it's over. Now, interestingly, this is one of the few cards in the Mystic Dreamer that doesn't have a moon. I believe that's the sun coming through the clouds there, but yeah, no moon. Who'd have thought it? Making an early appearance in this video is the Night Sun. I believe, yeah, the guy is standing up, but again, skewered with swords. We are informed here that it is the sun in Gemini, and indeed you've got the sun at the background there. Now, I do feel that the Night Sun is reminding us that the sun does play an element, and you know, the sun is that sort of idea of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of resurrection, maybe, because the sun does come up every day. It also goes down every day, so yeah, maybe the sun's informing us that things end and things begin again, and that's the idea, on the numerological idea behind most of the tens. If we can think about the Ten of Wands, for example, that guy carrying all the wands, and he's almost making it, and the Ten of Swords takes that a little bit further in that you're not going to make it. You've reached the end of the road, as it were. So that's the Night Sun. Moving on to the beautiful decks, here is Shadowscapes, and as usual, it's a very different image but has the same vibe. Now, the Shadowscapes, so you got this woman falling, and she's shouting as she's falling, and this is what the book says. She's shouting, the end, the end. It kind of informs us that she's falling and she's reached the end because of circumstances beyond her control, and she has the opportunity to learn from her mishaps. Now, these birds, they're kind of circling around her, waiting for her to fall, maybe to pick on a corpse, maybe. Who knows? Beautiful card. Some of these images are quite disturbing. It is the Ten of Swords. I think, well, to a certain extent, all the images are kind of disturbing, and the Line Strider is no different. And this is really harsh, really, isn't it? So you have a stag here. Again, he's on the ground. He's been skewered. There isn't really much to add to that, to be honest, really, is there? Here's the fountain. Using the same sort of dark black and red scheme that inform the 8 and 9 of Swords as well. The image is very much the same. In the book, the subtitle of this card is Final Release. And I'm hoping my camera can focus in just so you can get an idea of... I think you get the idea, really, don't you? Now, because the interpretations are quite across the board the same, I imagine we're going to shoot through these videos pretty quickly. And the Wild Unknown doesn't really add anything more to that. Here you have a bull, and disturbingly, he's been skewered through the eyes there, which, again, is going to hurt. It's going to fell him, really. I'm just going to take a moment to stroke the bunny, just so I feel a little bit better about myself. Moving on to the dark decks. Here's the Quantum Tarot, and I always put the Quantum Tarot in the dark decks, mostly because aesthetically it's dark. It's not sort of dark in content, but it does have a dark vibe about it. If I can just shine my light over there, you can see the embossed swords. The Quantum Tarot titles this card Star Death, and the vibe there is amazing. You've got a supernova there. That is a particular supernova. I can't remember which one. It's not the Crab Nebula. It's the Hourglass Nebula, I believe. And the idea is that when a star dies, it either collapses into a black hole, which is very rare, or it blows up in a supernova. And what happens when a supernova happens is all that gas and energy has been dispersed around, and it becomes a stellar nursery for new star birth. So you got that idea of the 10 again, of a completion and a rebirth, which is a very kind way of looking at the 10 of Swords, I think. But again, that's a vibe. That's a vibe in most of these decks, until we get to the Hermetics. Oh my goodness. So yeah, beautiful card. Moving on to the Deviant Moon. Again, the Deviant Moon doesn't really add anything more to the meaning. This guy is in a wooden box. He thought the wooden box would be sanctuary from his problems, his issues, and from the world outside. But no, the Ten of Swords will get you. Well, it'll get this guy, basically. Now we have the Archeon. The sentence that joins the Archeon states that in the shadow of the moon, tragedy befalls. Now, you do have a moon there. The moon, I mean, yeah, Cancer's just coming around the corner, and Cancer is ruled by the moon. It's also a blood red moon. There's two moons. I hadn't noticed that before. There's a crescent moon down there, and there's a full or a new moon up there. But yeah, it doesn't add anything more to the sense of a felled... It is a guy in this case, skewered. I'm saying skewered a lot. It's a bit mean, but that's what's happening. That's the Archeon. I'm doing the curveballs now for a particular reason, and they're not so much curveballs. They just add a slightly different dent to the general vibe. This is the Cosmic Tarot, and again, a very, very harrowing image. You have the sun up here, which is nice to see. Now, the Cosmic Tarot says total madness has taken possession of the person. And you need to bring forth a sense of acceptance of the unexpected. I'm not sure about the ray of light coming out of his mouth, but the interesting, the curveball element of the Cosmic Tarot is that sense of total madness. I mean, yeah, despair. This apparent looking death doesn't really suggest madness, but that's the Cosmic Tarot for you. Brilliant deck. Here is the Ryo Dark Tarot, and it does, for a start, this is interesting. As you know, as you maybe perhaps know, it's not a deck I'm particularly fond of. There's only one sword in this deck, and it's an interesting looking sword because half of it is hilt. Now, in the book that comes with the Dark Ryo Tarot, it says conflict, war, victory in blood. You've got to do what needs to be done. So there's that sense that again you get that completion, that things ending and a rebirth, but the victory achieved here is through violence, really. So you have this angelic woman that slayed some sort of beast. Yeah, kind of a slight different dent on it. I'm just going to strike the bunny. Thank you. Another curveball is, of course, the Santa Muerte. And this is a beautiful image. And it doesn't really take much to figure out why it's... I mean, it could be a butterfly, or indeed it could be a moth, but butterflies and moths, they have emerged from their chrysalis. If you've seen my Nine of Swords video, it's the Wild Unknown that has a chrysalis to suggest that there's an incubation period. But this butterfly or moth has emerged. And I'm going to read you out the advice from the dead. I'm just making sure I find the right page. The advice from the dead for the Santa Muerte Tarot says, subliminate all negative events that have passed and make the most of all the possibilities that are manifesting around you as soon as possible. Very much a positive bet. I mean, the Santa Muerte does like to be different, and why not, eh? Why not? And this card does have a very... I mean, look at it. There's flowers. You've got the nice airy yellows going on. It's a much more positive card than any of these other cards. Okay, I'd like you to steel yourself, because we're going to talk about the Hermetic decks here. And it's not good news, I'm afraid. So the Hermetic decks, I've got the Tot deck, the Golden Dawn deck, and the Hermetic Tarot. The Golden Dawn title of this card is the Lord of Ruin. There you have the Sun in Gemini. Ruin. It's just ruin. Just that's the word they're doing it. The Kabbalistic identity of the Ten of Swords, if you like, is the Sun, Tifereth, is in martyrdom and not resurrection, so there's a sense of sacrifice there. It is Malkuth in the scowl of Yetzirah, and that basically means bad stuff. So the Hermetic Tarot, you've got all these crossed swords, you've got this destruction in the middle there. Again, nothing really to add. I'm just going to skip... No, I'm not. I'm going to do this one. So this is the Golden Dawn Magical Ritual Tarot. And I've got some really bad news for you, but in the book that comes with it, which is a brilliant book, especially if Kabbalah is something that interests you, if the ritual magic of the ancient, I say ancient, of the Golden Dawn tradition, if that's something that interests you, that the book that comes with this particular deck is amazing. So much information, 90% of which I just don't understand. However, one of the really harsh things about this particular card and this particular tradition, if you like, is this card can also mean physical death, which is completely opposite to what all the other cards suggest. That, don't worry, it doesn't actually mean death, but it does clearly state in the book. Hang on, let's stroke the bunny. Take a deep breath. The book clearly states that this card can mean physical death, as opposed to a state of transformation. Now, I would imagine that most people, most tarot readers, the world in general, would like to reject that idea, because, you know, you got a 1 in 78 chance of pulling this card, and well, it would bring forth a lot of fear. A lot of the ruin that you may experience from pulling the 10 of Swords could be informed by that idea that it could mean physical death. I'm going to move on while I'm stroking the bunny. Okay, so again, as with the 8 and 9 of the Swords, you have hands that are holding double swords here, and you've got them crossed, not in peace but in war. The Rose of Gemini has been completely destroyed, as it was in the 9 of Swords, and the colour schemes mean all sorts of crazy things, but you do have the yellow of air, the yellow of the sun. And that is the Tot deck. The Tot deck is so complicated, and I'm not even going to start because I just don't get it. But there's a lot going on in this card. You have a heart. You have these. The swords are arranged in a particular way to make a hexagram, and that means something. The colours also mean something. but the vibe is still the same. You've even got Scales of Justice up here. All sorts of crazy things going on the top there. And if it's something that's interesting you, if this card is speaking to you, then seek out a copy of the Book of Tot, or Milo DeQuette's book, Understanding the Tot Tarot. Crowley's Tot Tarot, I think, is the full title. Is a brilliant and very humorous book that breaks it down really, really well. But there's so much going on here. All the shapes mean something. All the sword hilts mean something. The scales, the heart, the colours, the formation, they all mean something. But at the end of the day, it means ruin. In the Book of Tot by Aleister Crowley, there is a quote that says, "The ruin of the intellect and even all mental and moral qualities," which, well, it's a bit of a downer, isn't it? Now, I left the Hermetic decks to last to bring forth that idea of physical death, but I don't want to leave you with that. Quick, stroke the bunny. I've got a couple of bonus cards for you here. Before I do, if the Ten of Swords does come up in a reading, I would suggest that you don't go, "Oh my goodness, somebody's going to die," because that's not helpful for anybody, as I've already suggested. And it can mean other things, depending on where it comes up in a spread. It could mean things like bad advice, or something that is preventing you from releasing your negative thoughts, maybe. If money is the focus, then it could suggest you should be cutting your losses. If work is the focus of the spread, it could mean that you're burnt out mentally and physical, and you can't go on, you can't stand anymore. If relationships, friendships and love is the focus of the spread, then it could mean things like betrayal, backstabbing, bad things, basically. I'm so sorry. Quick, bunny. Okay, finally, I got a couple of cards just to lighten the mood a little bit. Any Game of Thrones fans out here? This is from the Game of Thrones card, and yeah, this is a horrible image. You've got 10 swords stuck in the ground with that traitor, and if you're a fan of the show, this is the end of season 5, where Jon Snow has been executed by the Night's Watch because they perceive him to be a traitor. Now, if you are a fan of the show, and it's been a few years since season 6 debuted, you know that Jon Snow comes back to life. He's brought back to life through dark magics, because it's his fate. So this reminds us of that idea, which is popular on most of the decks and understandings, that the 10 signifies some sort of completion, no matter how harsh it is, but you can start again. So thank you, Game of Thrones Tarot, written by Liz Dean, who is absolutely lovely, by the way. I do like the Game of Thrones deck, one for its synastry of imagery with the Waite Smith, but also because I do like the show. It's kind of fun, and this is a great card. It's a great card. It gets the vibe perfectly. Finally, and I've left this to the very end, I have to give you a wee bit of a warning. There are boobies in this card. This is from the Tarot of Sexual Magic, which is a deck that its focus is love, relationships and sex. This is a very saucy image. There's some saucy things going on in there, but the Ten of Swords in the Tarot of Sexual Magic does kind of vibe well with what we've been seeing so far. So the Ten of Swords is subtitled Squeezing, which is saucy, and its subtitle as The Magic of Tears. The Magic of the Tears. I'm reading this straight from the book. That's why I'm doing this. And the book says, even pain can be transformed into power. You mustn't flee from emotions, but rather use them to find the true essence of our desires, which is lovely. Now, if you like this image, I do have a video looking closely at the Tarot of Sexual Magic, but you have to go and look for it, because I don't want to be accused of spreading filth, although it really isn't filth. But I thought I'd end on that slightly more positive note, because, well, I'm exhausted. I feel exhausted after doing that. Bunny. But that's the Ten of Swords for you. It is a very harsh card. Is it a negative card? In some ways, it's not as negative as the Nine of Swords. Although, I mean, just look at that image. Just look at it. I'm going to leave you there with some calming music, with some rose quartz and a cute bunny. Thanks for watching.